Hey there, welcome to Broaderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Do you believe in the unseen? In the things that creep through the corners of our reality, waiting for someone like you or me to make a simple mistake, to crack open a door that should have stayed sealed forever? I didn't. Not until that night. It started as a perfectly normal evening, or at least I thought it would be. I had no idea that what I was about to witness would change my life forever, warping the edges of reality until nothing made sense anymore. I was staying in a small town in the Appalachian Mountains for work, a place that felt both timeless and forgotten, nestled deep within the woods where the fog clung to the trees like old secrets. People there were friendly, but they had an air of caution about them, like they were constantly keeping my eye on the forest. I brushed it off as typical small-town weirdness, the kind of superstitions people get when they live too far from civilization. My work had wrapped up early that day, so I decided to take a drive through the hills before sunset. The roads were winding and narrow, cutting through dense woods that seemed to close in on me the farther I went. Eventually, I came across a dirt road that I hadn't noticed before. It was almost hidden, just a break in the trees, like the forest itself was trying to keep it secret. Something about it drew me in, a pull I couldn't explain. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something darker, but I found myself turning onto the road without thinking twice. As I drove deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, and the light began to fade faster than it should have. The road narrowed even more, barely wide enough for my car, and I began to feel uneasy. But I kept going, telling myself it was just my imagination, that I was being ridiculous. After about 15 minutes of driving, I saw it, a small clearing up ahead. At first, I thought it was just a place where people came to camp or maybe an old hunting cabin. But as I pulled closer, I realized it was something else entirely. There was a circle of stones in the middle of the clearing, arranged in a way that felt deliberate, ancient. In the center of the circle stood a massive tree, its bark blackened and twisted, like it had been struck by lightning over and over again but refused to fall. Hanging from the branches were objects, figures made of sticks and straw, twisted into strange shapes, like they were meant to ward something off or call something in. My heart began to race, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. There was something about the place that felt wrong, but also mesmerizing. And that's when I saw them. At first, they were just shadows in the trees, barely visible through the thickening twilight. But as they stepped into the clearing, I realized they were people. A group of maybe 6 or 7, all dressed in long, dark cloaks. They moved in perfect unison, their faces hidden beneath hoods, and they were chanting something, a low, rhythmic hum that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I should have left. I should have turned the car around and sped out of there without looking back. But I couldn't. It was like I was glued to the spot, my mind screaming at me to leave, but my body refusing to obey. The figures circled the blackened tree, their chanting growing louder. Then, one of them stepped forward, pulling something from the folds of their cloak, a small, ornate knife. The blade glinted in the fading light, and they raised it high above their head. That's when I realized what they were doing. It wasn't a game. This was a ritual. And I was watching something I was never meant to see. My breath caught in my throat as they brought the knife down into the earth at the base of the tree, the chant reaching a fever pitch. The ground trembled, just for a second, but enough to make me feel like the world was coming apart at the seams. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, and then silence. Complete and utter silence. The figures stopped moving, stopped chanting, and for a long moment, everything was still. Then, slowly, they began to turn. One by one, they looked up from the ground and turned toward me. They knew I was there. Panic surged through me, and I slammed my car into reverse, tearing back down the dirt road, branches scraping against the sides of the car as I sped away. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. But even as I raced down the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Something unseen, but there, just at the edge of my vision. I could feel it watching me, waiting. I didn't stop driving until I reached my hotel. I parked the car and ran inside, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking, and my mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget the way they had turned, the way they had looked at me like they were expecting me. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blackened tree, the figures in the cloaks, and that knife glinting in the fading light. But it wasn't just fear that kept me awake. It was the feeling that something had changed, that something had been set in motion. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. At first, it was just small things, a door that would open on its own, a shadow moving in the corner of my vision. But then, it got worse. I started hearing whispers. At first, they were faint, just on the edge of hearing, like someone was speaking from another room. But soon, they grew louder, more insistent. They would come at night, right as I was about to fall asleep, soft voices calling my name, telling me things I didn't want to hear, things I didn't want to believe. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination, that I was still shaken from what I had seen in the woods. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just in my head. One night, the whispers stopped. I thought it was over, that maybe whatever had been haunting me had finally let go. But then, as I was lying in bed, I heard something else. A knock. It was soft at first, almost tentative, like someone tapping lightly on the door. I held my breath, listening, hoping it was just the wind or some kind of trick of the house settling. But then it came again, louder this time. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing as the knock came again. It wasn't coming from the front door, it was coming from the closet. I lay there in the dark, staring at the closed door of the closet, trying to convince myself that I hadn't heard it, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I had heard it. It was real. Slowly, I sat up in bed, my heart hammering in my chest. I could feel the weight of something pressing down on me, something heavy and dark, like the air in the room had turned to stone. I didn't want to move, didn't want to get out of bed, but I couldn't just sit there and wait for whatever was on the other side of that door to come to me. I reached over and turned on the lamp next to my bed, flooding the room with light. The knock didn't come again. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the kind that makes you question if you really heard what you thought you did. But then, a whisper. It wasn't coming from the closet anymore. It was coming from right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty room, bathed in the dim yellow glow of the lamp. But I could feel it, the presence of something unseen, something wrong. The whisper came again, closer this time. It wasn't saying words that I could understand, but it didn't need to. The sound of it crawled under my skin, making my stomach twist with dread. I couldn't stay there. I needed to leave. Grabbing my keys, I threw on a jacket and bolted out of the room, not even bothering to pack my things. I didn't care where I went, I just needed to get away from that place, from whatever was inside. As I drove through the empty streets of the small town, I tried to clear my head, to make sense of what had just happened. But no matter how far I got from that room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something had followed me. I ended up driving for hours, long past midnight, until I found myself on the edge of the woods again, the same woods where I had seen the ritual. The moon was high in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, and the road stretched out in front of me, dark and deserted. I should have turned around. I should have gone back to the hotel or even just kept driving until I reached the next town. But something inside me knew that it wouldn't matter. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going to stop just because I ran away. So, against every instinct in my body, I pulled over and got out of the car. The air was cold, biting against my skin as I stepped into the woods. The ground was damp beneath my feet, and the trees loomed over me, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching toward the sky. There was no sound, no wind, no animals, just the oppressive silence of the forest, like the whole world was holding its breath. I didn't know where I was going, but my feet carried me deeper into the woods, past the point where the dirt road ended, and into the thick underbrush. The farther I went, the more the feeling of being watched grew, until it felt like there were eyes on me from every direction, hidden in the shadows. And then, I saw it. The clearing. The same one I had stumbled upon days before, with the circle of stones and the twisted, blackened tree in the center. Only this time, it wasn't empty. The figures were there again, standing in a tight circle around the tree. Their hoods were up, their faces hidden in shadow, and they were chanting once more the same low, rhythmic hum that had haunted my dreams. But this time, something was different. This time, they were waiting for me. The chanting stopped as soon as I stepped into the clearing, and the figures turned, their heads snapping toward me in unison. My blood ran cold as I realized what was happening. They had known I was coming. They had been expecting me. Before I could react, one of them stepped forward, pulling back their hood to reveal a face I didn't recognize, but somehow knew. It was an old woman, her skin pale and wrinkled, her eyes sunken and dark. She smiled at me, but there was no warmth in it, only malice. "You saw what you weren't meant to see," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, but it carried through the still air like a knife. "And now, you've brought them with you." I didn't understand what she meant. But then, I felt it. A presence. Something dark and terrible, swirling around me, closing in like a predator. The air grew thick, suffocating, and I could feel it pressing against me, trying to get inside. "They are hungry," the old woman continued, stepping closer. "And now that you've opened the door, they will never leave." My heart pounded in my chest as the reality of the situation crashed down on me. This wasn't just some strange ritual in the woods. It was a doorway, a portal to something far worse than I could have ever imagined. And I had stumbled right into the middle of it. The figures began to chant again, their voices rising and falling in unison, and the ground beneath my feet trembled. The air around me grew colder, and I could feel the darkness closing in, wrapping itself around me like a vice. I had to get out of there. But as I turned to run, I realized that it was too late. The door was open, and something had come through. I tried to run, but the forest was alive around me. The trees seemed to twist and warp, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, blocking my path. The ground itself felt unstable, shifting beneath my feet, as if the earth was trying to swallow me whole. Every direction I turned, it was as if the forest conspired to keep me trapped within that terrible clearing. The chanting grew louder behind me, and I could feel the darkness pressing closer. It wasn't just a feeling, it was real. The air felt thick, like I was breathing through water, and the temperature had dropped so low that my breath came out in visible puffs. My legs burned with effort as I pushed forward, trying to fight my way through the underbrush. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't seem to get away. The clearing seemed to follow me, always just behind, the figure's voices echoing in my ears, their presence like a shadow on my soul. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath me, and I stumbled, crashing down onto my knees. The cold dirt was damp beneath my hands, and I could feel something slimy and wet seeping through the fabric of my jeans. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. The tree. The same blackened, twisted tree from the clearing, its branches reaching toward the sky like claws. But this time, it was different. The ground around it was cracked and split, and from within those cracks, something was oozing, thick, dark, and unnatural. It pulsed like a living thing, and the smell, it was like rot and decay, like death itself had seeped into the earth. I scrambled backward, but the earth beneath me shifted again, and I realized I was sinking. The ground had turned to mud, thick and sucking at my feet, pulling me down. Panic surged through me as I tried to free myself, but the more I struggled, the deeper I sank. The whispers returned, louder now, insistent. They weren't just in the air around me, they were inside my head, crawling through my thoughts like parasites, whispering things I didn't want to hear, things I didn't want to believe. You let them in. You let them in, and now they will never leave. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block them out, but it was no use. The voices were relentless, drilling into my mind, filling every corner of my being with their poisonous words. I could feel the weight of their presence, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I was losing. The darkness was winning. Just when I thought I couldn't fight anymore, just when I thought I would give in to the pull of whatever was lurking in that darkness, something changed. A sound, a sharp crack, like the snapping of a branch, cut through the air, and the whisper stopped. I opened my eyes, gasping for breath, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. In the distance, through the twisted branches of the trees, there was a light. Faint and flickering, like the glow of a distant fire. It wasn't much, but it was enough, a glimmer of hope in the midst of all this terror. Without thinking, I pushed myself up and started running toward it. My legs were weak, every step a struggle, but I kept going, fueled by some primal instinct to survive. The trees seemed to shift around me, parting just enough to let me through, and the closer I got to the light, the stronger I felt. As I neared the source of the light, I saw that it was coming from a small cabin, barely visible through the trees. Smoke curled up from the chimney, and the warm glow of a fire flickered in the window. It was like something out of a dream, too perfect, too safe, to be real. But I didn't care. I needed to get inside, away from whatever was out there in the woods. I stumbled up to the door and pounded on it, my heart racing, the cold air burning in my lungs. For a moment, there was no answer. I thought maybe the cabin was abandoned, that I was alone out here after all. But then, slowly, the door creaked open. An old man stood in the doorway, his face lined with age, but his eyes sharp and alert. He looked me up and down, taking in my disheveled appearance, the panic in my eyes. Without a word, he stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. I didn't hesitate. I rushed inside, grateful for the warmth of the fire that filled the small room. The cabin was simple, just a few pieces of worn furniture, a small kitchen area, and a fireplace that crackled softly, casting shadows across the walls. It felt safe. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The old man hadn't said a word, not even asked me who I was or what I was doing there. He just closed the door behind me and walked over to the fireplace, his movements slow and deliberate. I stood there, catching my breath, trying to figure out what to say. But before I could, the old man spoke. "They've been waiting for you," he said, his voice low and gravelly. My heart skipped a beat. "I've seen them before," he continued, turning to face me. "The ones in the woods. They don't come for just anyone, you know. You've been marked." I stared at him, my mind racing. How could he know? How could he possibly know what I had seen, what I had felt? "They'll keep following you," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "You've opened the door, and now it can't be closed. Not unless you finish what they started." I didn't understand. None of this made any sense. Finish what they started. What did that even mean? Before I could ask, the old man walked over to a small chest by the fireplace and opened it. Inside was an old, tattered book. He handed it to me, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "This is the only way," he said. "You have to complete the ritual." I looked down at the book in my hands. The cover was worn and faded, the pages yellowed with age. I could barely make out the strange symbols scrawled across the cover, but I knew, deep down, that this was what the figures in the woods had been using. This was their book. I didn't want to take it. I didn't want any part of this. But I knew, in that moment, that I didn't have a choice. Whatever I had unleashed, it wasn't going to stop until I did what they wanted. I stood there, gripping the book tightly in my hands, my mind swirling with confusion and fear. The old man's words echoed in my head, "You have to complete the ritual." But what did that mean? What was I supposed to do? The air inside the cabin was warm, but I felt cold, a deep chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, but its glow did nothing to calm the storm of panic rising inside me. The old man watched me in silence, his eyes dark and knowing. I wanted to ask him more, to demand an explanation, but the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight, my mouth dry. All I could do was stare down at the ancient book in my hands, its leather cover worn smooth by countless years of use. What is this?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely more than a whisper. "The grimoire," he said, his voice steady. "It's been passed down for generations, used by those who know the old ways, the ones who keep the balance. But you weren't supposed to see what you saw." His words sent a shiver down my spine. The old ways. The balance. This wasn't just some random event I had stumbled upon. This was something ancient, something bigger than me, bigger than anything I had ever known. "You have to undo it," the old man continued, his gaze never leaving mine. "The door has been opened, and now the boundary between our world and theirs is fragile. If you don't close it, they'll come through." "Who?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "The others," he said simply. "The ones that wait on the other side." I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach. I didn't need him to elaborate. I had already seen enough to understand what he meant. The things I had felt in the woods, the whispers, the cold, creeping dread, they weren't just figments of my imagination. They were real, and they were coming. I glanced down at the book again, my fingers tracing the strange symbols on the cover. The idea of performing any kind of ritual terrified me, but the thought of those things breaking through into our world was even worse. How do I stop it? I asked, my voice barely audible. The old man sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly. For a moment, he looked tired, as if the weight of what he was asking of me was too much for him to bear. "You'll have to go back to where it started," he said. "To the clearing. You have to complete the ritual the way it was meant to be done, but this time, you'll be in control. If you do it right, the door will close, and they'll be trapped on the other side." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as dust. The clearing. The idea of going back there made my blood run cold, but I knew he was right. There was no other way. The old man moved closer, his expression grim. "Take the book with you. It will guide you, but you must be careful. The forces you'll be dealing with are ancient and powerful. If you make even one mistake..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I understood the gravity of the situation. One wrong move, and the things on the other side would be free. I nodded, trying to steady my shaking hands as I clutched the book to my chest. The old man stepped back, his eyes never leaving mine. "When you're ready, go. But remember this, once you start, you can't stop. The ritual has to be completed." I didn't say anything. I didn't trust myself to speak. Instead, I turned toward the door, the weight of the book heavy in my hands, and stepped back into the cold night air. The forest loomed ahead of me, dark and impenetrable, but I could feel the pull of the clearing, like a magnetic force drawing me in. My heart pounded in my chest, but I pushed forward, determined to see this through. The walk back to the clearing felt longer than it had before, every step filled with tension and dread. The trees seemed to whisper as I passed, their branches swaying in the cold wind, as if they knew what I was about to face. When I finally reached the clearing, my breath caught in my throat. It looked exactly the same as it had the night I first saw it, the circle of stones, the blackened tree, the twisted figures made of sticks and straw. But this time, there was something else. A presence. It was subtle at first, just a feeling in the air, like the ground beneath my feet was vibrating ever so slightly. But as I stepped closer to the circle of stones, the feeling grew stronger until it was almost unbearable. I opened the book, my hand shaking as I flipped through the brittle, yellowed pages. The text inside was written in a language I didn't understand, the symbols strange and alien. But somehow, I knew what to do. It was as if the book was speaking to me, guiding me. I knelt down in the center of the circle, the cold earth beneath me sending a chill through my bones. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in from all sides, but I didn't look up. I couldn't. If I saw them, the figures, I wasn't sure I'd be able to continue. With trembling hands, I began to trace the symbols in the dirt, mimicking the ones I saw in the book. The air around me grew colder, and I could hear the whispers again, faint but unmistakable. They were watching me, waiting. As I completed the last symbol, the ground beneath me rumbled. The air felt thick, almost electric, and I knew the ritual was working. But something was wrong. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent, and the presence around me was closing in, suffocating. I tried to focus, to keep my mind on the ritual, but the voices were overwhelming, filling my head with doubt and fear. "You're not strong enough," they whispered. "You'll fail, and we will be free." Panic surged through me, and for a split second, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I could do this. The fear was too much, the darkness too strong. But then I remembered the old man's words, "Once you start, you can't stop." I gritted my teeth and forced myself to continue, speaking the final words of the ritual in a language I didn't understand. The ground trembled violently beneath me, and the wind howled through the trees. The darkness around me seemed to scream in protest, as if it knew its time was running out. And then, silence. The air was still, the earth beneath me motionless. For a moment, I thought it was over, that I had succeeded. But as I stood up, the cold realization hit me. Something was wrong. The door wasn't closed. I looked up, and that's when I saw it, something moving in the shadows, something dark and terrible, slipping through the cracks in reality. I had failed. The darkness that moved in the shadows was no longer just a presence, it had form. Something terrifying and incomprehensible was slipping through the cracks in reality, and I stood frozen, unable to look away. My heart screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was a figure, tall and twisted, its shape constantly shifting as if it couldn't fully exist in this world. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were dark voids, pulling me in like the endless depths of space. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, my body reacting to something that wasn't supposed to exist, something my mind couldn't fully comprehend. As it moved closer, the air around it seemed to warp and twist, the trees bending unnaturally, the very fabric of reality bending to its will. It was ancient, older than anything I could imagine, and I realized then that this was not just any spirit or demon. This was something far worse. Something that had been waiting on the other side for a long time, something that had been biding its time for the right moment to break through. And I had given it that moment. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps as I backed away, but it was no use. The ground beneath me felt like it was pulling me back toward the creature, the air thick with the oppressive weight of its presence. Every instinct in my body told me to flee, but I was trapped, both physically and mentally. The whispers returned, louder now, more insistent. They weren't just in my head anymore, they were all around me, filling the air, the trees, the very ground beneath my feet. You let us in. The voices overlapped, dozens of them, hundreds, all speaking at once. I couldn't block them out. They were inside me, inside my mind, filling every corner with their dark, poisonous words. You failed. The creature took another step forward, its form flickering like a dying flame, and I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just stand there and let it take me. I reached for the book, fumbling with the pages, my hands trembling as I tried to find the right incantation, the right words that would close the door. But the book didn't make sense anymore. The words on the pages were shifting, moving like they were alive, like they didn't want to be read. The symbols twisted and writhed, slipping through my fingers like smoke. It was as if the book itself had turned against me. Panic surged through me, and I dropped the book. My last hope, my only way to stop this nightmare, lay forgotten on the ground, and I was left standing there, helpless. The creature was almost upon me now, its towering form blotting out the moonlight. The air around it crackled with energy, and I could feel the sheer power radiating from it, power that was beyond anything I could ever hope to understand. And then it spoke. Its voice wasn't like the whispers. It was deep, resonant, vibrating through my bones, through the very earth beneath my feet. You opened the door. Now you will see. Before I could react, the creature lunged forward, its form dissolving into a swirling mass of darkness that enveloped me completely. The cold hit me like a physical force, sinking into my skin, into my bones. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was scream as the darkness swallowed me whole. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing. Just cold, empty blackness, a void that stretched on forever. I was no longer in the clearing, no longer in the forest. I wasn't even sure I was still in the world. I was nowhere and everywhere at once, lost in the space between reality and something else, something far worse. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I gasped for air as the darkness receded, and I found myself lying on the cold ground, the twisted black tree looming over me. The clearing was silent, the air still and heavy. The creature was gone, but the feeling of dread remained, hanging in the air like a thick fog. I slowly pushed myself up, my body aching, my mind reeling. Had I done it? Had I closed the door? I wasn't sure. Everything felt wrong, like I was still caught in some sort of nightmare. I looked around, half expecting to see the creature lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing. The clearing was empty, the forest eerily quiet. But the silence wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, as if the forest itself was waiting, watching. I stood there for a long time, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. The ritual was supposed to close the door, to seal whatever was on the other side back where it belonged. But I could still feel it, the presence, the weight of the darkness pressing down on me. It was still there, still watching. And then I realized the truth. I hadn't closed the door. I had opened it wider. I stood there in stunned silence, the cold reality settling over me like a heavy weight. The door wasn't just open, it was wide open now, and whatever I had unleashed was no longer bound by the thin veil separating our world from theirs. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced, searching for some way to reverse what I had done, but the book was useless, the ritual incomplete. The old man had warned me, but I hadn't understood the full gravity of his words until now. The air in the clearing seemed thicker, heavier than before, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling around me. The trees, once familiar, now loomed over me like towering sentinels, their branches reaching out like twisted arms, watching and waiting. A sudden movement caught my eye, and I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. At first, I saw nothing but the shadows cast by the blackened tree, but then I noticed it, a figure standing just beyond the edge of the clearing. It was tall, almost impossibly so, its form shifting in and out of the darkness like smoke. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching. It was as if it was waiting for something, waiting for me to do something. Slowly, I backed away, my eyes never leaving the figure. My legs felt weak, my body trembling with fear. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Not with that thing watching me. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the cold earth as I sprinted through the trees. The forest seemed to close in around me, the branches scratching at my skin as I pushed my way through. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified, the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs underfoot. It felt as though the forest itself was alive, shifting and moving in ways it shouldn't. But no matter how far I ran, the feeling of being watched never left. I could sense it, something was following me, always just out of sight, always just a step behind. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I expected to see that figure, tall and twisted, looming in the shadows. Finally, I broke through the trees and found myself on the edge of a small clearing. My chest burned with the effort of running, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I doubled over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. But the fear never left. I knew I wasn't safe, not yet. I glanced around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement, but the forest was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that sets your nerves on edge, the kind that makes your heart race for no reason at all. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. the figure. It was standing at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows of the trees. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but its presence was overwhelming. My skin prickled with fear, a cold sweat breaking out across my body. This wasn't just one of them. This was something worse, something I hadn't seen before, something that had crossed over because of what I had done. I took a step back, my mind racing. I needed to get out of here, needed to find some way to fix this, but I didn't know where to go or what to do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay here. Suddenly, the figure shifted, its form flickering like a dying flame, and for a split second, I saw it clearly. It was taller than any human should be, its limbs elongated and distorted, its face a twisted mask of something between human and something else. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were empty voids, darker than the night itself, and they locked onto mine. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest, and for a moment, I thought it would come after me, that it would close the distance between us in an instant. But it didn't. It just stood there, watching, waiting. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. I stood there, frozen, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The figure had vanished, melted back into the shadows as if it had never been there at all. But the feeling of dread remained, thick and heavy in the air. I had no idea what was happening, no idea what that thing was or why it was following me. All I knew was that I had made a terrible mistake, one that I wasn't sure I could ever undo. I turned and ran again, pushing through the trees, my heart racing with fear. The forest seemed endless, the trees all blurring together as I fled blindly through the underbrush. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, without warning, I stumbled out of the forest and found myself standing on the edge of the same clearing I had just left. My heart sank. It was as if the forest itself had trapped me, forcing me back to the place where it all began. I stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the twisted black tree in the center of the clearing, the ritual site that had started this nightmare. There was no escape. No way out. I was trapped. Possession by a demon. Have you ever felt like someone or something is watching you from within your own body? Controlling your thoughts, your actions, even your emotions? I didn't believe it was possible until it happened to me. I had always considered myself a rational person, one who believed in science and logic over superstition. Ghosts, demons, spirits, those were just stories people told to explain the unexplainable, right? But now, as I sit here, recounting everything that has happened, I realize how wrong I was. It started gradually, with little things. At first, I thought I was just tired, overworked maybe. I would lose focus in the middle of a task, find myself staring at nothing, my mind blank. It was as if I would momentarily slip out of reality, only to snap back seconds later, confused and disoriented. But then, it got worse. Much worse. One evening, I was sitting in my living room, the soft glow of the TV lighting the darkened room. I wasn't really watching, just trying to unwind after a long day. That's when it happened for the first time. My hand, it moved on its own. It sounds ridiculous, I know. But I swear, I wasn't in control. My fingers twitched, curling into a fist before releasing. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I felt it. I didn't make my hand do that. It was like an invisible force was pulling the strings, making my body move against my will. I shook it off, convincing myself it was just a muscle spasm. Nothing to worry about. But deep down, I felt the first inkling of fear. Something wasn't right. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences multiplied. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart racing as if I had been running. But I hadn't moved. My dreams, once vivid and colorful, became dark and twisted, filled with faceless shadows and whispers I couldn't quite understand. The worst part was the feeling that I was never alone. No matter where I went or what I did, I could feel it, a presence lingering just out of sight, watching, waiting. It was as if someone, or something, had taken residence inside me. I remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror one morning, looking at my reflection. My face looked different. It was subtle, but there was something off about it, something I couldn't put my finger on. My eyes, once bright and full of life, seemed darker, hollow almost. And my expression, it wasn't mine. The person staring back at me wasn't me. That's when I heard it. The voice. It wasn't loud, just a faint whisper in the back of my mind, but it was unmistakable. It said one word, just one, but it sent chills down my spine. Mine. I stumbled back, heart pounding, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I looked around, convinced someone was in the room with me. But of course, there was no one there. I was alone, or so I thought. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of the presence bearing down on me, suffocating me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They didn't say much, just fragments of words, but the intent was clear. I was losing control. I tried to ignore it, to push it to the back of my mind. But how do you ignore something that's inside you? One day, while at work, things escalated. I was sitting at my desk, typing an email, when my hand froze. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move it. Panic surged through me as I stared at my motionless fingers, willing them to respond, but they remained still. Then, slowly, my hand began to move, but not in a way I was directing. My fingers typed out a single sentence. You are mine. I stared at the words on the screen, terror clawing at my throat. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst out of my chest. I frantically deleted the sentence, but it didn't matter. The message was clear. Something had taken hold of me. I left work early that day, too shaken to concentrate. On the drive home, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, convinced I would see something in the back seat. My paranoia was consuming me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I got home, I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted and scared. I tried to calm myself, telling myself that I was just stressed, that everything would be fine. But as I sat there in the silence, the whispers returned. Let me in. This time, they were louder, more forceful. My body tensed as an overwhelming sensation of dread washed over me. It felt like something was pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was listen as the whispers grew more insistent. Let me in. The voice was no longer just a whisper, it was a command. A dark, malevolent force was trying to break through, and I could feel it gaining strength. I don't remember falling asleep that night, but I must have, because I woke up hours later in complete darkness. My heart was still racing, my body slick with sweat. I sat up, disoriented, the events of the previous day playing on a loop in my mind. That's when I realized something was wrong. My hands, they were different. I looked down at my hands, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The skin was pale and discolored, veins bulging beneath the surface. My fingers were trembling, but not from fear or cold. It was something else, something unnatural. They didn't feel like my hands anymore. My entire body felt wrong, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. Every movement, every twitch felt off, like I was no longer the one pulling the strings. And then I saw it, a dark shadow creeping along the wall, just out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but it was gone, vanishing before I could fully register what it was. My heart pounded in my chest, and the air felt thick, oppressive. "Let me in." The voice was back, louder than ever, echoing inside my skull. I clutched my head, trying to block it out, but it was useless. It was inside me now, entwined with my thoughts, my body. I staggered into the hallway, barely able to keep my balance. My reflection in the hallway mirror caught my eye, and what I saw sent a chill down my spine. The figure staring back at me wasn't me. It was something else entirely, my face, twisted and contorted, the eyes dark and hollow, filled with something inhuman. It grinned, a slow, sinister smile that spread across its face. I could feel its satisfaction, its hunger. "You can't fight me," it whispered. "I'm already here." I stumbled back, knocking over a lamp as I did. The crash echoed through the house, but I barely noticed. I was too consumed by the terror of what was happening. I wasn't alone in my own body anymore. Desperate, I grabbed my phone and called the only person I could think of, Father O'Connor, an old family friend who had been a priest for as long as I could remember. He answered after the third ring, his voice calm and steady. "Father, something's wrong with me," I gasped, barely able to get the words out. I think I'm possessed." There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment I thought he might hang up. But then he spoke, his voice grave. "I'll be there in an hour." An hour felt like an eternity. Every minute, every second that passed, I could feel the presence inside me growing stronger. It whispered in my ear, mocked me, taunted me. "You're weak," it said. "You can't stop me. This is my body now." I tried to fight it, tried to push it out, but it was no use. It was too powerful, too deeply rooted inside me. When Father O'Connor finally arrived, I was on the floor, drenched in sweat, my body shaking uncontrollably. He knelt beside me, his face grim as he pulled out a small crucifix and a vial of holy water. "We have to act quickly," he said, placing the crucifix on my forehead. The moment it touched my skin, I felt a searing pain, like my flesh was burning. I screamed, the voice inside me howling in rage. "No!" the demon shrieked, fighting against the holy relic. "This is my body." But Father O'Connor was relentless. He recited prayers, his voice steady and unwavering as he sprinkled holy water over me. The pain was unbearable, and for a moment, I thought I would die right there, consumed by the demon inside me. But then, slowly, the pain began to fade. The voice grew weaker, its hold on me loosening. I could feel it retreating, being pushed back into the dark corners of my mind. And then, with one final, ear-splitting scream, it was gone. I collapsed, my body limp, the room spinning around me. Father O'Connor helped me to my feet, his face lined with exhaustion. "It's over," he said quietly, but I wasn't so sure. Even now, as I sit here writing this, I can still feel its presence lingering just beneath the surface, waiting for another chance to take control. Because once a demon has touched your soul, it never truly leaves. Days passed, but the feeling of unease never left me. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw something lurking behind my eyes, something not quite human. I could feel it watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Sleep became a rare luxury, and when I did manage to close my eyes, the nightmares were relentless. I dreamed of dark corridors, endless halls with doors that never opened. I could hear whispers coming from behind them, sinister, guttural voices that called my name, telling me to let go, to give in. At the end of every corridor stood a figure, shrouded in shadows, its eyes glowing a deep, blood red. No matter how fast I ran, I could never escape it. I was trapped, even in my own dreams. One night, I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. But this time, something was different. The air in my room was thick, suffocating, like a heavy fog had rolled in. I reached for the lamp beside my bed, but my hand froze halfway. There, at the foot of my bed, stood the shadowy figure from my dreams. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching me with those terrible, glowing eyes. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed with fear. "You thought it was over," it whispered, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "But I'm always here. You can't get rid of me that easily." My chest tightened as the weight of the demon's words sank in. It hadn't left. It had never left. Suddenly, the figure lunged at me, and in a blink, it vanished. But the terror it left behind clung to me like a second skin. I jumped out of bed, every muscle in my body trembling. My mind raced, searching for answers. What did it want? Why hadn't the exorcism worked? In a panic, I grabbed my phone and called Father O'Connor again. This time, I didn't wait for pleasantries. "It's back, Father," I said, barely able to keep the tremor out of my voice. "The demon, it's still here." There was a long pause before he responded. When he did, his voice was lower, more serious than before. "Then we're dealing with something far more powerful than I thought," he said. "I need you to come to the church. Immediately." Without another word, I grabbed my keys and bolted out of the house, barely pausing to lock the door behind me. The drive to the church was a blur of streetlights and darkness, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. By the time I arrived, Father O'Connor was waiting for me outside, his face pale and drawn. He didn't waste time with greetings. "There's only one thing left to try," he said, ushering me inside. The church was eerily quiet, the flickering candles casting long shadows across the pews. The air was cold, biting, as if the very atmosphere knew what was about to happen. We walked down the long aisle, past rows of empty seats, until we reached the altar. Father O'Connor motioned for me to kneel, and I did, my heart pounding in my chest. "This is going to be different from before," he warned, pulling out a worn, ancient-looking book from his robes. "The demon has a stronger hold on you than I realized. What we're about to do, it could be dangerous." I nodded, too terrified to speak. Father O'Connor began to chant, his voice steady and firm, but the words were in a language I didn't understand. As he spoke, the air around us seemed to thicken, growing heavy with a palpable sense of dread. The candles flickered wildly, as if caught in an unseen wind. And then, it happened. A sharp pain shot through my body, like a knife being driven into my chest. I gasped, clutching my stomach as the sensation spread, burning through every nerve. My vision blurred, and I fell to the ground, convulsing as the demonic presence surged to the surface. "It's fighting back," Father O'Connor shouted, his voice strained. "Hold on, you must hold on." But I couldn't. The pain was unbearable, my body thrashing violently as the demon tried to rip itself free. I could feel it, inside me, clawing its way to the surface. My body was no longer my own, writhing under its control, twisting in ways that no human body should. My mouth opened, but it wasn't my voice that came out. The deep, guttural growl that filled the church echoed off the walls, chilling me to the core. "You're too late, priest," the demon snarled through me. "This body is mine." Father O'Connor didn't falter, his chanting growing louder, more urgent. The Latin words tumbled from his lips like a waterfall, each one sharper, stronger than the last. He held up a crucifix, pressing it against my forehead. The burn was immediate, a searing pain that tore through me like fire. I screamed, but it wasn't my scream. The demon's voice mixed with mine, a horrifying chorus of agony and rage. "Get out!" Father O'Connor commanded, his voice like thunder. "You have no place here." For a moment, the pressure eased, the grip on my soul loosened. But then, just as suddenly, it tightened again, stronger than before. I could feel the demon's claws sinking deeper into me, wrapping around my mind like chains. "He's ours now," it hissed, and I could feel its triumph. The room seemed to darken, the candles sputtering out one by one until we were plunged into near total darkness. Only the faint glow of the cross and Father O'Connor's hand remained, casting a dim light over my trembling body. I could see the priest's face now, drenched in sweat, his hands shaking as he fought to maintain control of the exorcism. He knelt beside me, placing one hand on my chest, the other gripping the crucifix tightly. "You must fight it," he urged, his voice hoarse. "You must push it out." But I was too weak. My body felt like it was being torn apart from the inside, my mind a battlefield of chaos and terror. I tried to focus, to gather my strength, but the demon was relentless, whispering dark promises in my ear. "Let go," it coaxed, its voice soft now, almost soothing. "I can take the pain away. I can give you power beyond your wildest dreams." For a split second, I was tempted. The thought of relief, of finally being free from this torment, was almost too much to resist. But then I remembered, this thing had already taken so much from me. My peace, my sanity, my very sense of self. I couldn't let it take anything more. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pushed back. I focused on the sound of Father O'Connor's voice, grounding myself in his words, in the faith that had brought me here. The demon screamed in fury, its hold on me wavering for just a moment. "No!" it shrieked, its voice growing louder, more desperate. "You can't." But before it could finish, there was a blinding flash of light. The pressure in my head exploded, and suddenly, I was free. I collapsed onto the cold stone floor, gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. The weight that had been crushing my chest was gone, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. Father O'Connor knelt beside me, his face pale but filled with relief. He whispered a prayer, his hand resting on my shoulder as I lay there, trying to comprehend what had just happened. "It's over," he said softly. "The demon is gone." But as I lay there, staring up at the flickering candles, a cold dread settled over me. Was it really gone? I wanted to believe it, wanted to trust that the exorcism had worked, but something inside me, some dark, nagging feeling, told me otherwise. The demon's words echoed in my mind over and over again. "I'm always here." The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and fleeting moments of normalcy. Father O'Connor checked on me regularly, assuring me that the worst was behind me. but I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't entirely convinced either. The nightmares continued, though not as intense as before. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced that I wasn't alone in my room. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, and the house felt wrong, as if it were holding its breath, waiting. And then, one night, it all came crashing down. I woke up to the familiar feeling of being watched. My body tensed, every nerve on high alert. Slowly, I turned my head toward the corner of the room. It was there. The shadowy figure from before, standing silently in the corner, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. My heart pounded in my chest, my body frozen in terror. "You thought it was over," it whispered, its voice slithering into my mind. But I never left. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It was back, and this time, I knew there was no escaping it. The figure stepped forward, its form becoming clearer in the dim light. It wasn't the demon from before. This was something different, something older, more powerful. Its presence filled the room, oppressive and suffocating. "You are mine," it said, and with those words, the room plunged into darkness. The darkness was absolute. I couldn't see, couldn't feel. The air around me had thickened, as if the very atmosphere was closing in. My breath was shallow, each inhale a struggle. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, choked by the weight of the presence bearing down on me. Then, slowly, I began to hear it, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You cannot run. You cannot hide." The voice was soft, almost tender, but it carried with it the undeniable weight of something ancient, something eternal. I could feel its presence pressing against my mind, like fingers probing through my thoughts, searching for something. I tried to fight it, tried to push the voice away, but it was relentless, growing louder, more insistent. "You invited me in. I've always been here, watching, waiting, and now I will claim what is mine." Panic surged through me, my body reacting instinctively. I scrambled backward, my hands searching for something, anything, to ground myself, but there was nothing. The room was gone, no bed, no walls, just an endless void. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, my pulse thundering in my ears. "What do you want from me?" I screamed into the abyss, my voice echoing back to me, weak and hollow. There was silence for a moment, and then the voice answered, colder than before. "Everything." A wave of fear crashed over me, more powerful than anything I had ever felt. The weight of the entity's presence was crushing, suffocating. I felt its tendrils curling around my consciousness, pulling me deeper into the void. Suddenly, I was no longer in the darkness. I was standing in my childhood home, the familiar creak of the wooden floors beneath my feet, the scent of my mother's cooking wafting through the air. For a brief moment, there was comfort in the familiarity, a sense of peace that washed over me like a warm blanket. But then, I noticed the details. The cracks in the walls were too deep, the shadows too dark. The air felt heavy, stagnant, as though time itself had stopped. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible. But it felt real. It smelled real. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of birds outside the window. Everything was just as I remembered it. But I knew this wasn't right. As I moved through the house, my footsteps echoing in the unnatural silence, a feeling of dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I reached the living room, and that's when I saw it. My mother, sitting in her favorite armchair, staring out the window. For a moment, relief washed over me. I almost called out to her, but something stopped me. There was something wrong. Her posture was too rigid, her head slightly tilted at an unnatural angle. She wasn't moving, she wasn't breathing. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw her face. It wasn't my mother. The thing sitting in her chair turned slowly to face me, its eyes black and hollow, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. It smiled, a grotesque mockery of my mother's smile, and spoke in her voice. "Welcome home, dear." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. I closed my eyes, willing myself to wake up, to break free from this nightmare, but when I opened them again, the thing was still there, grinning at me with those dead, empty eyes. "You belong to me now," it whispered, rising from the chair in one slow, deliberate motion. Its form shifted and twisted, the skin melting away like wax, revealing something dark and grotesque beneath. I turned and ran, my legs moving on instinct, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The house stretched on and on, the hallway growing longer with each step. I could hear the thing behind me, its footsteps slow and deliberate, as if it knew there was no need to hurry. "You can't escape," it called after me, its voice now a low, guttural growl. "You invited me in. I am a part of you." I reached the front door, my hands fumbling with the lock. I could feel it getting closer, the air around me growing colder with each passing second. My fingers finally found the latch, and I threw the door open, stumbling out into the night. But the outside world wasn't any better. The sky was pitch black, no stars, no moon. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground beneath me felt soft, like it was shifting under my weight. I could hear whispers all around me, voices I didn't recognize, calling my name, beckoning me to come closer. "This isn't real," I repeated to myself, over and over, like a mantra. But the ground beneath me was real. The cold wind against my skin was real. The thing behind me, whatever it was real. I could feel its presence closing in on me, the weight of its gaze pressing down on my soul. "You cannot run from me," it whispered, the sound of its voice wrapping around me like a cold, suffocating fog. "I am in every shadow, in every dark corner of your mind. You will never be free." I fell to my knees, the weight of its words crushing me. My mind was unraveling, the line between reality and nightmare blurring until I could no longer tell the difference. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A faint light, flickering in the darkness.